After being murdered by my husband and my best friend, my soul stood in line at the registry of the dead. Rebirth and reincarnation. Which family do you choose? The Grim Reaper flipped through his ledger, asking me with complete indifference. I looked up and pointed to the mirror of soul judgment, which showed the wretched couple. They were hugging each other, celebrating that they had finally gotten rid of me. I smiled. Their family. I want to be the sweet fruit of their love. The Grim Reaper froze for a moment, warning me, such heavy resentment. Be careful. It might ruin your luck in your next life. It's fine. I waved my hand carelessly. In this life, I'm going back to be their little blessing. The next second, I was enveloped in warm amniotic fluid, followed by a dizzying sensation of pressure, accompanied by a loud, piercing cry. I, Vivian Sterling, was born into this world as Evelyn Carter, the daughter of my worst enemies. Congratulations, Mr. Carter. It's a healthy baby girl. Listen to those strong lungs. The nurse wiped me clean and carefully carried me over to the woman in the hospital bed. Melanie Vance, my former best friend. Right now, her face was pale, but she practically glowed with a fake saintly, motherly light as she reached out her arms toward me. My sweet baby, let mommy hold you. Her voice was so sweet it could make your teeth ache. Mommy, are you even worthy of that word? The exact millisecond her fingertips brushed against my baby's skin. Without any warning, I unleashed the most agonizing, hysterical scream of my life. What? Ah. My shriek was so sharp it shattered the warm, peaceful atmosphere of the delivery room. The nurses and the doctor all jumped in. Startle. Melanie was so terrified that her hands shook, almost dropping me on the floor. What's wrong? She was perfectly fine just a second ago. The nurse quickly snatched me back. The moment I was out of Melanie's arms, my crying instantly quieted down into soft whimpers. Newborns just feel insecure sometimes, the doctor explained casually, not thinking much of it. But Melanie's face had already turned slightly pale. Once we returned to the Carter estate, as long as Melanie came within 3 steps of me, my internal alarm would go off. The moment she tried to hold me, I would instantly transform from a sweet, doll-like baby into a dashing hedgehog. My tiny limbs flailed wildly, my sharp baby nails clawing mercilessly at any exposed skin on her face, neck and arms. Ouch. Melanie gasped in pain. She looked down and saw 3 bright red scratches, bleeding on her smooth arm. Taking advantage of the moment, I began to cry even louder, looking as if I were the one who had suffered some horrible abuse. What? What is going on here? Marcus Carter rushed in at the sound of the noise, only to witness this exact scene. Melanie had blood on her arm, while her daughter in her arms was screaming her lungs out, looking like she was being tortured. I don't know. She just suddenly started. Melanie's face was white. Marcus impatiently grabbed me from her arms. The moment I hit his chest, my crying stopped instantly. I let out 2 pathetic, innocent little hiccups. I buried my flushed little face against his warm chest, found a comfortable spot and fell fast asleep. The contrast between this angelic, quiet baby and the monster of a second ago was night and day. Marcus looked at the angel in his arms, then at the bloody scratches on his wife's arm. His brows furrowed into a deep frown. From that day on, this became the daily routine in the Carter household. If Melanie held me, I scratched her and cried like the world was ending. If Marcus, Grandpa Arthur, Grandma Eleanor or even the nanny held me, I was as sweet and quiet as a porcelain doll. Before I was even a month old, Melanie's arms were covered in a patchwork of new and old scars. She had to wear thick layers of concealer, just to hide the claw marks on her face. The rumor that the Carter family's little heiress was born to hate her mother began to spread quietly among the high society. That night, Melanie's lip was scratched open by me once again. She finally snapped. What do you want from me? She slammed the bedroom door, staring at me in my crib, screaming in a low, distorted, demonic voice. Are you a devil? Why do you only do this to me? I opened my large, clear, innocent eyes, staring at her in complete silence. Yes, I am the demon who came back to drag you to hell. Seeing that I wasn't crying or making a sound, Melanie's sanity crawled back slightly. She took a deep breath, trying to comfort herself. You're just a baby who doesn't know anything. You don't understand. Her hand trembled as she reached toward me again, as if trying to prove something to herself. Right then the door swung open. Marcus walked in carrying a warm glass of milk. What he saw was his wife's twisted, angry face, and her hand reaching toward their daughter in a threatening gesture. Melanie, what are you doing? He bolted forward, shielding me tightly in his arms. The look he gave her was freezing cold, filled with utter disappointment. I didn't do anything. I just wanted to hold her. Melanie pleaded in despair. Marcus held me close, gently patting my back. Then without even looking at Melanie, he said coldly, if you hate her so much, stay the hell away from her. From now on, Maria will take care of her. Ever since her maternal rights were practically stripped away, Melanie's status in the household plummeted. She went from being the lady of the manor to an invisible, unwanted ghost who just happened to be a mother on paper. Marcus grew colder to her by the day, while Grandpa and Grandma ignored her existence entirely. Only during high society family gatherings, where they needed to put on a show for the media, would she allow to hold me, pretending we were a loving mother and daughter, under everyone's pampered love. I grew to be 2 years old. I began to speak some simple, broken words. Every single word was calculated with absolute precision. On Arthur's 70th birthday gala, the Carter mansion was packed with elite guests and media. I wore a custom-made red designer dress, looking like a perfect little angel. Grandpa held me proudly in his arms, soaking in everyone's compliments. Melanie stood to the side in an expensive gown, her heavy makeup masking her pale face, forcing a stiff smile. I knew what she was waiting for. She was waiting for a chance to display her motherly love in public, to salvage her reputation. Sure enough, when it was time to cut the cake, she picked up a small plate with a slice of vanilla cake. She walked toward me with elegant, graceful steps, her voice dripping with sweetness. Evelyn, my sweet baby. Come to mommy, let mommy feed you some cake. She had bet on the fact that I wouldn't dare make a scene in front of so many distinguished guests. Too bad for her. She guessed wrong. I had waited for this day for far too long. I immediately squirmed out of Grandpa's arms, sliding down to the floor. I backed away, frantically looking at her as if she were a pile of toxic waste. My little face was filled with pure terror and resistance. No, no. I whimpered in a shaky baby voice. Melanie's smile froze. The surrounding relatives and guests all turned their eyes over, eager for some drama. Evelyn. Be good. Mommy won't hurt you. She panicked, taking another step forward, trying to grab my hand. Now I snapped my hand up, using every ounce of my toddler strength to point directly at her face, which was now slightly distorted with fear. Then I channeled all the hatred and murderous rage from my past life, condensing it into the most vicious curse through the mouth of a 2-year-old child. Word by word, I screamed at the top of my lungs. Bad woman. Killer. Killer. The entire ballroom fell into a dead, horrified silence. Everyone stared at me, then at Melanie, whose face had turned as white as a sheet. Killer. What did she just say? Did I hear that right? Oh. My God. Is this child possessed? Whispers rushed through the crowd like a tidal wave. Grandpa and Grandma were the first to react. Grandma snatched me into her arms, frantically rubbing my back to comfort me. Don't be scared, Evelyn. Did you have a nightmare yesterday? Don't say such silly things. Meanwhile, all the color drained from Marcus's face. Melanie completely lost her mind. I didn't. It wasn't me, she shrieked, pointing a shaking finger at me, her voice wild and hysterical. It's her. This little brat is lying. She's not normal. She's a demon. Mother calling her own 2-year-old daughter a brat and a demon. In front of the city's entire high society. Shut the hell up. Marcus stormed over and slapped her hard across the face. You insane. How dare you say that to a 2-year-old? I buried my face in Grandpa's shoulder. Watching the two murderers turn on each other brought a thrilling rush of pure ecstasy to my soul. The disaster at the birthday gala was the final straw that broke Melanie. Mad woman, bitter wife. The mother cursed by her own daughter. These labels stuck to her like hot tar. She couldn't even hold her head up in the Carter house anymore. Marcus avoided her like she was the plague. He seemed to actually believe the rumor that I was some vengeful spirit. Every day after work he locked himself in his study. He'd rather stare at the wall than look at his true love. Completely isolated, Melanie's mental state deteriorated rapidly. She didn't dare approach me anymore. But every time she looked at me, her eyes were filled with venomous hatred. She started playing passive-aggressive mind games with me. She would purposely knock over my milk, make loud jarring noises while I was sleeping, and even pinch my arms hard when no one was looking. I endured all of it in silence, because I knew she was just throwing a desperate tantrum. And I was waiting for the perfect opportunity to send her straight to hell. That opportunity came in the form of a crystal music box, hidden deep inside her jewelry vanity. It was the anniversary gift Marcus had given her, right after she found out she was pregnant with me. I quietly slipped into her bedroom. I dragged a vanity stool over, climbed up onto the dressing table, and pulled out the sparkling crystal music box. Without a second of hesitation, I raised it high above my head and slammed it down onto the marble floor. Smash. With a loud shatter, the music box exploded into a million sharp glass shards. But that wasn't enough. I closed my eyes, letting the memories of my brutal death and my past life flood my mind. Then I picked up the sharpest piece of glass and sliced it hard across my own pale arm. Ah, sharp. Burning pain flared up and bright red blood instantly gushed out. The sheer pain made me dizzy. But I stood firm. I dripped a few drops of blood onto the dress of my favorite teddy bear, then held it tightly, running out of the room with my body covered in evidence. Grandpa, Grandma. My tearful, terrified screams echoed through the hallways, bringing everyone running in panic. They saw me standing there, my clothes messed up, my body shaking violently, clutching a bloodstained teddy bear. On my other arm, a deep, nasty gash was pouring blood. Oh, my God, Evelyn. Grandma let out a horrified shriek, sprinting toward me first. I dove straight into Grandma's arms, sobbing so hard I could barely breathe. Using my carefully practiced broken vocabulary, I wove the perfect lie. Mommy. Bad mom. Mommy don't like Evelyn. I held up the bloodstained teddy bear, crying until I almost fainted. Broke toy. Toy is broken. Finally. I held out my bleeding arm, whimpering softly, ow. Hurts, bleeding. Every single word felt like a physical blow to everyone's heart. Melanie stood frozen at the doorway. She stared at the gash on my arm, then at her own empty hands. Her mind went completely blank. No, it wasn't me. I didn't do it. Her defense sounded pathetic and hollow in the face of all the blood. You absolute monster. Grandpa's body shook with pure rage. Pointed a finger at her, his eyes practically spitting fire. How dare you lay your filthy hands on Evelyn? The Carter family has no place for a sick, twisted woman like you. Marcus was also completely terrified by the bloody scene. He looked at me, then at the frantic screaming Melanie. The very last shred of affection he had for his wife was instantly replaced by terror and disgust. As they rushed me to the hospital, I rested my head on Grandpa's shoulder, over the shoulders of the panicked crowd. I looked back at Melanie, whose face was now dead and hollow. Silently mouthed 2 words to her. Go die. She understood. She stared at me and finally let out a blood-curdling, non-human shriek of pure terror. The wound on my arm required 5 stitches. I became the most precious, delicate treasure of the Carter family. Everywhere I went, people treated me like glass. Grandpa hired 2 private bodyguards to watch over me 24 hours a day. Their only job was to make sure Melanie never came within 10 feet of me. Melanie, on the other hand, was placed under house arrest. In her bedroom, I heard she went completely mad, smashing everything in her room, screaming that I was a demon and that I had cut myself. Of course, nobody believed her. Who would believe the frantic ramblings of a child abuser? But I knew this wasn't enough. House arrest was just the beginning. I wanted her gone from this house and from my life permanently. The Carter family announced 3 days later that Melanie was leaving the mansion. Officially, they called it a temporary psychiatric evaluation. Nobody believed that. Everyone in high society knew exactly what had happened. The Carter family's beloved little heiress had been injured inside her own home, and every finger pointed toward her mother. Melanie's reputation collapsed overnight. But before she was taken away, she made one final attempt to destroy me. That morning, I was sitting in the garden with Grandpa Arthur, eating strawberries while my nanny watched from a few feet away. 2 bodyguards stood nearby. I was halfway through my 3rd strawberry when Melanie appeared at the end of the garden. She looked completely different. Her hair was messy, her expensive robe was wrinkled, and her eyes were swollen from days of crying. The guards immediately stepped forward. Mrs. Carter, stop right there. Melanie ignored them. Her eyes were locked on me. Evelyn. I looked up. She stared at me for several seconds before suddenly laughing. It was a strange, broken laugh. You think you've won? Grandpa's expression darkened. Take her back inside. Melanie screamed, she isn't your granddaughter. Everyone froze. Grandpa slowly turned toward her. Melanie pointed directly at me. That thing isn't Evelyn. My little hand tightened around the strawberry. She had finally cracked. I know what she is. Melanie screamed. She's Vivian. She's my best friend Vivian. The entire garden went silent. My nanny's face drained of color. One of the guards exchanged a confused glance with the other. Grandpa stared at Melanie as though she'd completely lost her mind. You murdered Vivian, she continued wildly. And now she's back. She came back to punish me. I almost laughed. She actually remembered. I had spent 2 years believing I was the only person carrying memories from my previous life. Apparently, I had been wrong. Melanie looked straight into my eyes. For one terrifying second, I saw something familiar behind hers. Recognition. She remembered everything. The car. The blood. My husband's hands around my throat. Her laughter while I begged them to stop. My body being dumped into the river. She remembered. And suddenly, I understood why she'd been so terrified of me. She wasn't imagining things. She knew exactly who I was. I slowly lowered my strawberry. Then I smiled. A tiny, innocent toddler smile. Melanie's entire body began trembling. See, she screamed. Look at her. She's smiling because she knows. She knows who I am. Grandpa grabbed my hand. Get this woman away from my granddaughter. The guard seized Melanie before she could come any closer. She fought like a wild animal. Evelyn. Tell them. I tilted my head. Mommy. Melanie stopped struggling. I pointed at her. Bad mommy. Her face crumpled. You little monster. She lunged forward. The guards dragged her away before she could reach me. I watched her disappear through the garden doors. Then I looked up at Grandpa. Grandpa. Yes, sweetheart? Mommy sick. His expression softened immediately. Yes, sweetheart. Mommy is sick. I rested my head against his arm. Inside, I was smiling. Because now I knew something extremely important. Melanie remembered our previous life. And that meant she was afraid of me. Very afraid. That made everything much easier. That afternoon, the Carter family held an emergency meeting. Melanie was taken to a private psychiatric facility. Marcus signed the papers himself. I watched from the hallway as he handed them over. He looked exhausted. For years, he had loved Melanie. Then I was born. And somehow, everything had changed. But there was something else bothering me. Marcus hadn't once asked why Melanie kept calling me Vivian. He simply accepted that she was mentally unstable. That meant I needed to find out how much he remembered. That night, I crawled into his study. He was sitting behind his desk, staring at an old photograph. I recognized it immediately. It was a picture from my previous life. Me. Marcus. Melanie. The 3 of us standing together at a restaurant. My stomach twisted. He still had it. I slowly walked toward him. Marcus looked up. Why are you awake, sweetheart? I climbed onto his lap. He automatically wrapped an arm around me. I stared at the photograph. Then I pointed. Mommy. Marcus stiffened. Yes. I pointed at myself. Evelyn. Then I pointed at the photograph again. Vivian. The photograph slipped from Marcus's fingers. It landed on the desk with a soft slap. His face had gone completely white. Evelyn. I watched him carefully. He whispered my old name. Vivian? I smiled. Marcus suddenly stood up so quickly that I nearly fell from his lap. He stared at me like he'd seen a ghost. Then his hands began shaking. That's impossible. I reached out and touched his cheek. Papa. He closed his eyes. A tear rolled down his face. And then he whispered something that made my blood run cold. I remember. I stared at him. Marcus remembered. My husband remembered. The man who had murdered me remembered every second of it. He sank into the chair, covering his face. I remember everything. His voice broke. I remember what we did to you. I climbed down from his lap. For 2 years, I had believed Marcus was simply another victim of Melanie's manipulation. But now I realized the truth. He hadn't been innocent. He had known. He had participated. And perhaps the reason he'd become so terrified of Melanie wasn't because he believed she was dangerous. It was because he knew exactly what they had done together. Marcus looked at me through tear-filled eyes. Vivian. I smiled sweetly. Papa. He flinched. I walked toward the door. Then I turned around. I gave him the same innocent smile I'd given Melanie. And I said the only words my 2-year-old vocabulary needed. Bad people go hell. Marcus's face collapsed. I walked out. Behind me, I heard something crash. Then his broken sobbing echoed through the study. I didn't feel sorry for him. My revenge had just become much more interesting. Because I had originally planned to destroy Melanie. Now I was going to make sure both of them remembered exactly why they deserved to lose everything. Marcus didn't sleep that night. By morning, he'd confessed everything. Not to the police. To Grandpa Arthur. He admitted that Vivian hadn't died accidentally. He admitted he and Melanie had planned it. The Carter household exploded. Grandpa nearly collapsed from rage. You murdered her? Marcus dropped to his knees. I was blinded by Melanie. I was stupid. I regretted it every day. Regret doesn't bring her back. The police were called. Melanie was brought back from the psychiatric facility in handcuffs. The moment she saw Marcus being arrested, she started screaming. You promised we'd never tell. That single sentence destroyed them both. The police opened the old case. Evidence that had once been dismissed as circumstantial was suddenly enough to reopen the investigation. Melanie confessed first. Then Marcus. Within weeks, their entire story became front-page news. The Carter family's perfect marriage was exposed as a murder conspiracy. Melanie received a life sentence. Marcus received decades in prison. The Carter family cut every connection with them. Their wealth was frozen during the investigation, their property seized, and every social connection they had disappeared. Meanwhile, I stayed with Grandpa and Grandma. I grew up surrounded by people who genuinely loved me. At 5, I started piano lessons. At 7, I learned to swim. At 10, Grandpa took me horseback riding. By 12, I had completely stopped having nightmares about my previous life. I thought my revenge was over. Then, on my 15th birthday, a letter arrived. There was no return address. Inside was a single photograph. It showed Melanie in prison. On the back, someone had written. She knows you're still alive. I stared at the photograph. Then I smiled. Apparently, hell had one more surprise waiting for me. And this time, I wasn't a helpless woman waiting to be murdered. I was the Carter family's beloved heiress. I had 15 years of power, money, and preparation behind me. If Melanie wanted to come back for me, she was welcome to try. The letter wasn't from Melanie. It was from someone who had visited her in prison. And that person knew about my past life. Before I could investigate, Grandpa received another letter. This one contained a prison visitation record. A name was circled in red. Daniel Sterling. My blood ran cold. My former husband. The man who had murdered me. He hadn't been dead. He had changed his name, disappeared overseas, and spent the last 15 years hiding. Now he was back. And apparently, he remembered everything too. 3 days later, Daniel appeared outside the Carter estate. He stood at the gate staring toward the mansion. I watched him through the upstairs window. He looked older. But I recognized him immediately. The same eyes. The same smile. The same man who had once whispered that nobody would ever believe me before killing me. Grandpa's security team surrounded him within minutes. Daniel didn't resist. He simply looked toward my window. Then he smiled. Evelyn. My fingers tightened around the curtain. He knew. That night, Daniel was arrested for his involvement in Vivian Sterling's murder. But before the police took him away, he shouted one final thing. Vivian. You can't escape your fate. I smiled from behind the window. He was right. I couldn't escape my fate. Because my fate had never been to die. It had been to come back. And this time, I was going to make sure every person responsible for my death paid the price. Years later, I stood outside the prison where both Daniel and Melanie were serving their sentences. I didn't go inside. I didn't need to. I had already won. Behind me stood Grandpa, Grandma, my husband, and my children. A real family. A family that loved me. I looked at the prison gates one last time. Then I turned around and walked away. In my first life, I died as Vivian Sterling. In my second life, I became Evelyn Carter. And this time, I wasn't anyone's victim. I was the blessing they never deserved. The end.